This vintage jar has two names on it, S.W. Graham and Kellogg's. This episode is part one of a two-part series. Today we will cover the life of Sylvester Graham. He's known for the graham cracker, among other things. So let's get started on this episode of Antique Bottle Stories. Sylvester Graham was born in 1794 in Connecticut. He was the 17th child. His father was 70 when he was born, and his mom was mentally ill. When his dad died, Sylvester was 2, and he moved around and he lived with different relatives. One of his relatives had a tavern, and that was one of his first jobs. Being around drunk people made him hate alcohol, and he swore he would never drink. He got involved with the temperance movement, which was an organization that fought to keep cities dry because they believed that alcohol caused problems with work performance, health problems, and just problems in general. I can actually relate to this. Both of my parents were alcoholics, and I've seen what alcohol does. I've always said that my parents showed me what not to do, and I can count on one hand how many drinks I've had in my 43 years. So Sylvester became a minister in his 20s, and when he was 29, he married Sarah, and they had 3 children, but one died as a baby. Soon, the Grahams moved to Philadelphia, where they found a vegetarian church, and Sylvester took some of those ideas and he did other research, and he decided that meat was just as gluttony as drinking alcohol was, corrupting the mind and body. He was influenced by a book written by a French chemist in 1826. And in this book, it basically said that what people ate greatly affected one's health. And that led to more research where Graham started advocating against the use of chemicals in food, especially bread. In my family, we actually mill our own flour. We order organic wheat berries on Amazon, and we have a flour miller. And notice that they're brown. Wheat berries vary in color. Under proper circumstances, wheat berries have a 25-year shelf life, but once you mill it, it only has about 3 days before it starts going rancid. So I keep mine in the freezer or the fridge when I'm not using it. Unprocessed wheat flour is brownish. These are a few pictures that I took the other day when I milled some flour. Notice mine kinda looks like beach sand. It has much more fiber and protein in it. Today, they sift out all the good stuff so that it has a longer shelf life. So back then, bakeries would use chemicals to hide the fact that their flour was spoiling. They also used chemicals to whiten the flour, which we still do today. So Sylvester advocated to stop buying bakery goods and make your own. As you can imagine, the bakers were not too happy with him. So certain behaviors like physical pleasure and lust he believed were related to certain foods and certain spices, and he believed that to control these lustful behaviors, at times he called it overstimulation, you were to eat bland food. He thought humans should avoid butter, vinegar, pepper, cinnamon, sweets, coffee, soups, mustards, ginger, and gravies. He believed that humans were only meant to eat plants like Adam and Eve did. Sylvester believed that diseases were due to not living the way that God intended. He's also one of the first people who considered that stress could also cause harm to the body. So he started traveling around, preaching these beliefs. No alcohol, no fish, no meat, only vegetables. And he gathered a following, and these people were called Grahamites. There were actually Graham boarding houses where like-minded people could live, where they ate strict vegetarian, drank only water, and they slept with the windows open even in the wintertime. I found a Graham house in New York, Boston, and Vermont. Sylvester did not set these up himself. They were set up by, believers. Now, the earliest newspaper article that I found was in 1832. Sylvester gained popularity, especially during the cholera epidemic of 1832. People who had been following his lifestyle seemed to be thriving. By the way, this lifestyle was called Gramism. Now, in 1837, Sylvester published some of his findings, urging people to bake their own bread from fresh milled flour instead of buying it from the bakers. He declared that refined white flour was injurious to health. and he's not wrong. So, angry bakers would start showing up at places that he lectured to protest and harass him. Once, Sylvester had to be barricaded inside of a hotel when a mob of bakers formed outside. Well, some time had passed, and the baker started baking whole wheat breads, using his name to sell them. This says, in his book, he strongly advocated the making of bread from unbolted flour, hence the term Graham flour, which is just unbleached, coarse milled flour that is not sifted, keeping the proteins in. Graham bread, which was free from chemicals and additives, and since it was made with unaltered flour, it was high in fiber. And graham crackers, which are not like the graham crackers you're thinking of today. The earliest graham crackers were made out of graham flour, shortening or lard, molasses, and salt. Even though these were named after him and carried his name, he didn't patent them or make any money off of them. In this 1836 article, it says, this celebrated lecturer on the science of human life, which is one of his many published lectures, is now in Boston. He was unanimously invited to repeat his course in that city. It goes on to say, it is our earnest desire that Mr. Graham visit Vermont. There were also some skeptics and mockers of this movement. So this 1843 article responds, it is very evident that those who make themselves so merry about bran bread and sawdust pudding know nothing of the system Sylvester Graham has labored for years to establish. We dined a few days since at an excellent house, and though flesh or fowl did not grace the board, a plentiful meal, palatable and nutritious, was served up and partaken of a dozen or so gentlemen, who looked very little like the unsubstantial shadows that the Grahamites are represented to be. Now this one's kind of funny. This 1850 article says, a vegetarian convention was held in New York. Dr. Sylvester Graham and Dr. Whiting had an animated and not very good-tempered discussion. It says, the effect of the vegetable diet was to make men as meek and gentle as lambs, but it would seem that there is some of the old Adam left even in brown bread and sweet apples. The graham crackers started being mass-produced by the National Biscuit Company in 1898. Other biscuit companies soon began mass production as well. I think even though Sylvester's legacy is almost 200 years old, it still holds water. We still have some of these food issues today. Ironically, Sylvester Graham was sickly most of his life, and he died in 1851 at the age of 57. Sources say that right before he died, his doctor had prescribed him to eat meat in order to help with blood circulation and hopefully regain his health, which Sylvester said he deeply regretted. He ended up being given opium enemas, which caused complications that killed him. In the paper, it said that he possessed talents and genius of a high order. It says, with his disease, it gives credit to his diet and lifestyle that he lived as long as he did. After he died, the Grahamites slowly dissipated. I guess he wasn't exactly the poster child for the Gramism movement, making you live longer. Who knows how well this idea would have taken off if he'd lived into his 90s or longer. Here's an interesting 1894 article from a former Grahamite and his story. And here's just a little snippet that I thought was really weird. He says, Graham claimed that when a considerable amount of fatty substance like butter was taken into the stomach, bile should be injected as an alkali, turning the fatty substance into soap, that in doing so, the stomach literally became a soap vat. That is weird. So my cookie jar has a label on it, vermilion. I went looking on eBay to see if there were other examples, and there's a lot of stuff that they made. Wooden bowls, trays, all kinds of things. Most of the listings labeled them from the 60s or 70s, and I found that the company's still in business. Now they're only working with wood flooring. So I called them, and I asked the lady if she had any information on this jar. She took a couple days to research it, and then she called me back, and she said, as it turns out, they only made the wooden lid for this jar. The glass came from a different company. She said this could have been a special order from a department store. And in case anyone has any of these bowls or trays, they're more likely from the 80s. And she said, my jar is more likely from the mid-90s. And here I have it appropriately filled with homemade cookies made from Graham flour. So Sylvester Graham influenced many other Americans, including John Harvey Kellogg. He and his brother Will invented cornflakes, and that story is coming up in part 2. So we'll see you then. Thanks for watching.